Verses 27 to 30. We have here Paul brought into a captivity which we are not likely to see the end of, for after this he is either hurried from one bar to another, or lies neglected, first in one prison and then in another, and can neither be tried nor bailed. When we see the beginning of a trouble, we know not either how long it will last or how it will issue. We have here Paul seized, and laid hold on. He was seized in the temple, when he was there attending the days of his purifying, and the solemn services of those days, v. 27. Formerly he had been well known in the temple, but now he had been so long in his travels abroad that he had become a stranger there, so that it was not till the 7 days were almost ended that he was taken notice of by those that had an evil eye towards him. In the temple, where he should have been protected, as in a sanctuary, he was most violently set upon by those who did what they could to have his blood mingled with his sacrifices in the temple, where he should have been welcomed as one of the greatest ornaments of it that ever had been there since the Lord of the temple left it. The temple, which they themselves pretended such a mighty zeal for, yet did they themselves thus profane. Thus is the church polluted by none more than by popish persecutors, under the colour of the church's name and interest. The informers against him were the Jews of Asia, not those of Jerusalem, the Jews of the dispersion, who knew him best, and who were most exasperated against him. Those who seldom came up to worship at the temple in Jerusalem themselves, but contentedly lived at a distance from it, in pursuit of their private advantages, yet appeared most zealous for the temple, as if thereby they would atone for their habitual neglect of it. The method they took was to raise the mob, and to incense them against him. They did not go to the high priest, or the magistrates of the city, with their charge, probably because they expected not to receive countenance from them, but they stirred up all the people, who were at this time more than ever disposed to anything that was tumultuous and seditious, riotous, and outrageous. Those are fittest to be employed against Christ and Christianity that are governed least by reason and most by passion. Therefore Paul described the Jewish persecutors to be not only wicked, but absurd, unreasonable men. The arguments wherewith they exasperated the people against him were popular, but very false and unjust. They cried out, "Men of Israel, help! If you are indeed men of Israel, true-born Jews, that have a concern for your church and your country, now is your time to show it, by helping to seize an enemy to both." Thus they cried after him as after a thief, Job 30:5, or after a mad dog. Note, the enemies of Christianity, since they could never prove it to be an ill thing, have been always very industrious, right or wrong, to put it into an ill name, and so run it down by outrage and outcry. It had become men of Israel to help Paul, who preached up him who was so much the glory of his people Israel, yet here the popular fury will not allow them to be men of Israel, unless they will help against him. This was like, "Stop thief," or Athaliah's cry, "Treason, treason, what is wanting in right is made up in noise." They charge upon him both bad doctrine and bad practice, and both against the Mosaic ritual. They charge upon him bad doctrine, not only that he holds corrupt opinions himself, but that he vents and publishes them, though not here at Jerusalem, yet in other places, nay in all places, he teaches all men, everywhere. So artfully is the crime aggravated, as if, because he was an itinerant, he was a ubiquitary, he spreads to the utmost of his power certain damnable and heretical positions against the people of the Jews. He had taught that Jews and Gentiles stand on the same level before God, and neither circumcision avails anything nor uncircumcision, nay, he had taught against the unbelieving Jews that they were rejected, and therefore had separated from them and their synagogues, and this is interpreted to be speaking against the whole nation, as if no doubt but they were the people, and wisdom must die with them, Job 12:2, whereas God, though he had cast them off, yet had not cast away his people, they were lo ami, not a people, Hos 1:9, and yet pretended to be the only people. Those commonly seem most jealous for the church's name that belong to it in name only. Against the law. His teaching men to believe the gospel as the end of the law, and the perfection of it, was interpreted his preaching against the law, whereas it was so far from making void the law that it established it. Against this place, the temple. Because he taught men to pray everywhere, he was reproached as an enemy to the temple, and perhaps because he sometimes mentioned the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and of the Jewish nation, which his master had foretold. Paul had himself been active in persecuting Stephen, and putting him to death for words spoken against this holy place, and now the same thing is laid to his charge. He that was then made use of as the tool is now set up as the butt of Jewish rage and malice. They charge upon him bad practices. To confirm their charge against him, as teaching people against this holy place, they charge it upon him that he had himself polluted it, and by an overt act showed his contempt of it, and a design to make it common. He has brought Gentiles also into the temple, into the inner court of the temple, which none that were uncircumcised were admitted, under any pretense, to come into. There was written upon the wall that enclosed this inner court, in Greek and Latin, "It is a capital crime for strangers to enter." Paul was himself a Jew, and had right to enter into the court of the Jews. And they, seeing some with him there that joined with him in his devotions, concluded that Trophimus an Ephesian, who was a Gentile, was one of them. Why? Did they see him there? Truly no, but they had seen him with Paul in the streets of the city, which was no crime at all, and therefore they affirmed that he was with Paul in the inner court of the temple, which was a heinous crime. They had seen him with him in the city, and therefore they supposed that Paul had brought him with him into the temple, which was utterly false. See here. Innocency is no fence against calumny and false accusation. It is no new thing for those that mean honestly, and act regularly, to have things laid to their charge which they know not, nor ever thought of. Evil men dig up mischief, and go far to seek proofs of their false accusations, as they did here, who, because they saw a Gentile with Paul in the city, will thence infer that he was with him in the temple. This was a strained innuendo indeed, yet by such unjust and groundless suggestions have wicked men thought to justify themselves in the most barbarous outrages committed upon the excellent ones of the earth. It is common for malicious people to improve that against those that are wise and good with which they thought to have obliged them and ingratiated themselves with them. Paul thought to recommend himself to their good opinion by going into the temple, he had not been so maligned by them. This is the genius of ill nature, for my love, they are my adversaries. PS 109:4, 69:10. We have Paul in danger of being pulled in pieces by the rabble. They will not be at the pains to have him before the high priest, or the Sanhedrim, that is a roundabout way. The execution shall be of a piece with the prosecution, all unjust and irregular. They cannot prove the crime upon him, and therefore dare not bring him upon a fair trial, nay, so greedily do they thirst after his blood that they have not patience to proceed against him by a due course of law, though they were ever so sure to gain their point, and therefore, as those who neither feared God nor regarded man, they resolved to knock him on the head immediately. All the city was in an uproar. v. 30. The people, who though they had little holiness themselves, yet had a mighty veneration for the holy place, when they heard a hue and cry from the temple, were up in arms presently, being resolved to stand by that with their lives and fortunes. All the city was moved, when they were called to from the temple, Men of Israel, help, with as much violence as if the old complaint were revived. PS 79:1, O God, the heathen are come into thine inheritance, thy holy temple have they defiled. Just such a zeal the Jews here show for God's temple as the Ephesians did for Diana's temple, when Paul was informed against as an enemy to that. Ch 19:29. The whole city was full of confusion. But God does not reckon himself at all honored by those whose zeal for him transports them to such irregularities, and who, while they pretend to act for him, act in such a brutish barbarous manner. They drew Paul out of the temple, and shut the doors between the outer and inner court of the temple, or perhaps the doors of the outer court. In dragging him furiously out of the temple, they showed a real detestation of him as one not fit to be suffered in the temple, nor to worship there, nor to be looked upon as a member of the Jewish nation, as if his sacrifice had been an abomination. They pretended a veneration for the temple, like that of good Jehoiada, who would not have Athaliah to be slain in the house of the Lord. See how absurd these wicked men were. They condemned Paul for drawing people from the temple, and yet, when he himself was very devoutly worshipping in the temple, they drew him out of it. The officers of the temple shut the doors, either lest Paul should find means to get back and take hold of the horns of the altar, and so protect himself by that sanctuary from their rage, or rather, lest the crowd should by the running in of more to them be thrust back into the temple, and some outrage should be committed, to the profanation of that holy place. Those that made no conscience of doing so ill a thing as the murdering of a good man for well-doing, yet would be thought to scruple doing it in a holy place, or at a holy time, not in the temple, as not on the feast day.